New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively.
Hey everybody, it's Tracy Brown and take that deep breath with me as we dive into the Saturday morning Science of Mind lecture and conversation series. I love this topic. I mean, really, really love this topic. The whole idea of focusing on faith seems like it just is a no-brainer. Of course, if we are going to talk about spiritual living, then we must have faith. We must demonstrate faith. But in the Science of Mind textbook, the chapter that is specifically focused on faith, which is chapter 10, only goes from page 155 to 162. And I remember thinking at one point, well, shouldn't faith be like 30 or 40 pages, at least in a book of several hundred pages? And what I realized, of course, as I've studied, is that all of it is about demonstrating faith, but it is important for us to know what are we putting our faith in, how are we directing the faith, and how do we know that we are demonstrating the faith. So then it made more sense that this chapter really unpacks faith, but almost everything in the book is about recognizing, using, and demonstrating that faith. So if you're following along in the textbook, again, we begin on page 155. And as Ernest Holmes does at the beginning of every chapter, right, there is a summary of what the topics are. So in the brief time we have together right now, we're going to pick a few of these. But all of them are the mental approach, faith, it's always a power. Misplaced faith, understanding faith, no confusion, or faith demonstrates as no confusion. Faith is available to all. How you vitalize faith, the technique of acquiring faith, and what conviction means as a demonstration of faith. So I will start where Ernest Holmes starts. Well, actually, I'm going to start where Reverend Elzia took us a week ago. So no matter when you're watching this, if you're watching the recording, I'm going to pull together the conversation from the previous chapter, which was on prayer. And in the last two sections of that chapter, the headings are our prayer is essential to happiness. And the last section, prayer is its own answer. And the reason I want to go back there is because a lot of times, if we haven't had a lot of experience in in new thought or in thinking about things from a metaphysical perspective, then what happens is we think of prayer as something external, right? And Reverend Elzia did a great job with this. So, go really watch that recording if you weren't on live with him. But we're not praying to something outside or some great deity in the sky. It's going to bless us or decide whether to respond to us. Really, what prayer is faith demonstrated, and it's conviction. It's all the things we're going to talk about today, but it's doing it in a way that really shifts our own internal consciousness and belief system so that we can work with spiritual law to manifest that which we want. So for me at least, I need to think a little bit about that as I dive into faith, because the very beginning of this chapter on faith reads as follows. Faith is a mental approach. The universe is a spiritual system. A spiritual system. Its laws are those of intelligence. We approach it through the mind, which enables us to know, to will, and to act. Prayer, faith, and belief are closely related to mental attitudes. Repeating, prayer, faith, and belief are closely related mental attitudes. Not related to mental attitudes, but closely related mental attitudes. Prayer is a mental attitude. Faith is a mental attitude. Belief is a mental attitude, and they are closely related. So Ernest Holmes goes on to say, second paragraph of page 155, prayer is a mental approach to reality. It is not the symbol, but the idea symbolized that makes prayer effective. Some prayers are more effective than others. Some only help us to endure, while others transcend conditions and demonstrate an invisible law which has power over the visible. Insofar as our prayer is affirmative, it is creative of the desired results. So see, even Ernest Holmes can't talk about faith without reminding us about prayer first, and that it's a mental attitude that is creative. Now he goes on to talk about faith. Faith has been recognized as a power throughout the ages, whether it be faith in God, faith in one's fellow human, fellow man, fellow person, faith in oneself, or faith in what one is doing. The idea that faith only has to do with our religious experience is a mistake. Faith is a faculty of the mind that finds its highest expression in the religious attitude, but always the person who has faith in one's own ability accomplishes far more than the one who has no confidence in self. Those who have great faith have great power. This end quote. Now, this next paragraph comes up in every class I have ever taught about prayer, and every class I've ever taught where the topic of the week or the class was on faith. So Ernest Holmes addresses it directly with this paragraph. Why is it that one person's prayer are answered, while another's remain unanswered. Have you ever had that question? Right? All of us have had that question. And here's what Ernest Holmes says. It cannot be that God desires more good for one person than another. It must be that all persons in their approach to reality receive results, not because of what they believe in, but because of their belief. Faith is an affirmative mental approach to reality. So just take that in for a minute. How do you know? I'm going to phrase the question this way. How do you know you have faith? How do you know you have faith? And I love what Ray has said in the chat, that the medicine man healed me as a child. I believe I had faith that I would be healed regardless of Christianity. Right? How do you know, or how did you know, or when did you know you had faith, or you were using faith? Wayne reminds us of the Ernest Holmes quote perfectly. Direct contact with the spirit is illumination. But spirit is invisible. But there's an illumination. There's an illumination of the mind. There's an illumination of our physical presence, our energetic, that we know we are connected to spirit. And when we know we are connected to God or to this infinite intelligence that is invisible, and we know it for sure, we operate or demonstrate our faith. So sometimes I think I always think one of the most important two paragraphs, right? Two of the most important paragraphs in this entire philosophy are right here on page 156. As I told you, this chapter on faith is short, right? It's not a long chapter, but it is a foundational chapter. So this next two paragraphs on page 156 are focused on misplaced faith. And Ernest Holmes says that fear is actually nothing more nor less than the negative use of faith misplaced. A belief in two powers instead of one. A belief that there can be a power opposed to God whose influence and ability may bring us evil. In other words, to correct all the evils of the world would be but to have the positive faith rightly placed, a faith that lays hold of the integrity of the universe, the beneficence of God, and the unity of all life. Nevertheless, we cannot have faith in that which we do not in some measure understand. So the fear of lack is nothing more than the belief that God does not. The fear of death is the belief that the promises of eternal life may not be true. The fear of loss of health, loss of friends, loss of property, all arise from the belief that God is not all that we claim: omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. So here's how I think about it. And this has served me well, so maybe it will help you as well. Sometimes we say in our use of the English language, I don't have faith. I wish I had more faith. Or you need to increase your faith. But in reality, we all have 100%, a 100% helping of faith. There is no more or no less. However, what helped me really grasp that was thinking about this idea of misplaced faith. If I have 100% faith, how am I using it? What percentage of my faith am I attributing to the good, to spiritual law, to assurance that spiritual law is working for me always, that my prayers must be answered? And how much of my faith am I directing toward, I don't know if it's going to work out. Well, the devil made me do it. Oh, well, there's evil in the world. Well, that's impossible, because whatever it is that I am believing in, that I am allowing from a mental perspective to drive my actions and my decisions and my interpretation of what's happening in the world, that shows me how I am allocating my portion of faith. So we might do better to say something instead of saying, I want to have more faith. We might do better to say, I want to increase my faith in the good, my faith in God, as well as my faith of God, which I'll talk about in a minute. How does this show up? It shows up, again, connecting it to prayer last week and laying the foundation for future conversations around belief in general. If I am focusing mentally on, well, of course, this is not going to work out, I am putting my faith in it is not going to work out. And I am just misplacing that energy, right? The energy works, whether I am directing it toward what I perceive to be a negative outcome, or whether I direct it toward an outcome that I perceive to be positive. Because we've talked about some chapters in this book that have come before this that remind us there is only one power, and it is always working. And what we believe and how we direct that power is influencing the direction of what actually manifests and what we experience. And we will get more of that. So this is not as simple, is I guess the word that's coming to mind. It's not as simple as being positive or negative, right? The universe doesn't have that kind of weighting. That's a human construct. This is positive and this is negative. I'm going to have positive thinking. Oh, I need to stop my negative thinking. Instead, it is my belief in alignment with what I know is true in spiritual law? And as Wayne is reminding us in the chat, we are moving from fear to faith. Like faith and fear are on the same continuum, but we can, in our human brain, from a binary perspective, we can think of faith as at one end of the spectrum and fear at the other. But it's the exact same energetic. It is the exact same law that is working, spiritual law that is working. Faith and fear are the same. It's just how are we directing our energy? And there's no magic to it. There really is no magic to it. So at the bottom of page 156, Ernest Holmes starts a section that is labeled Understanding Faith. Because when we understand it, we get to choose it and use it in appropriate ways. So Ernest Holmes writes, we wish a faith based on the knowledge that there is nothing to fear. Our faith is based on the knowledge there is nothing to fear. And in the Bible, right, it's written, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And he goes on to write, the thought of faith molds the undifferentiated substance and brings into manifestation the thing which was fashioned in the mind. This is how faith brings our desires to pass. Spiritual substance is all around us, waiting to be formed. Thus we see what Jesus meant when he said, and I say unto you, ask, and it shall be given unto you. The law must work in compliance with our demand. The divine urge within us is God's way of letting us know that we should push forward and take that which is awaiting our demand. If the good were not already ours in the infinite supply, it would be impossible for us to procure it in any manner. All right. I've read this thousands of times. But like just now, slowing down and really thinking about every word just in a couple of sentences. Oh, this is big, right? It's simple, but it's big. If the good were not already ours in the invisible supply, it would be impossible for us to procure it in any manner. So we have already, in earlier sections of the book, determined there is an infinite supply. When we say God is all there is and God is infinite, there is an infinite supply of all things. And our faith that infinite supply and the creator of that infinite supply that also created us, that created me, makes the infinite supply available to me. And it is my thought and my actions. And in this week, we can see our faith is demonstrated by what we are thinking and what we are doing. So that infinite, I'm tapping into that infinite supply. And it must say yes. The universe only has one word in its vocabulary, as we are fond of saying. So I'm going to ask again, what is it that you have faith in, or how do you know you're demonstrating faith? What do you have faith in? Or how do you know you are demonstrating your faith? Now, as you're thinking about that, obviously feel free to drop in the chat how you know you're demonstrating your faith or what you have faith in. But I'll be honest, right? When I put my faith, I can catch myself when I find myself putting my faith in something that is a human decision that someone else has to make. I find myself reacting to something that someone said. And I'll realize that, oh, I'm getting caught up in placing my faith in this other human being or group of human beings doing something a certain way. And there's nothing wrong with that. And when I catch myself being really upset about something that requires human behavior to change, then, someone else's human behavior to change, sometimes I catch myself and I go, oh, well, what if they don't change? What if they keep doing that? And I think about it and I move to the place of, but my real faith is that everything is good or leading to good. The principle, what's the spiritual principle? Or the spiritual principle of, if everything is happening as it should, moving toward a bigger vision or a bigger goal, then maybe this person is supposed to do this thing that I am thinking is so horrible, because it will shift like a domino effect, some other things, or create a situation that opens the door for what I really want. And I am locking on to this one way that I would do it, or I would say it. And really, if I have faith in an infinite God with infinite power that is always moving toward good and representing good, then how is this fitting into that puzzle? And so my faith is in the spiritual principle. My faith is in the law, the way spiritual law works, not in this other person or group being good or bad. I love what Fiona reminds us of, that she knows she has faith that through prayer, she can create a shift in consciousness. So we demonstrate our faith by using spiritual practice. We demonstrate our faith by what we say and do. I tell people all the time, I can tell you in a feedback loop what you believe by what you are doing and saying and the circumstances of your life. And so I love that, Fiona, that absolutely I have faith in that spiritual principle, and practice works all the time. And I use prayer, affirmative prayer, in order to create a shift in my own consciousness. So that's just another great demonstration of how the previous chapter on prayer and this chapter on faith really are so intermingled, because as Ernest Holmes has reminded us, they are really how we position mentally to navigate our human experience. So when we understand misplaced faith, that fear is just misplaced faith, it is directing our faith. It is using our faith to focus on or to believe in the outcome that we do not want. And faith in itself is, like most spiritual stuff, it's neutral. We get caught up in our human structures of what we want, what we don't want, what society says is good, what society says is not good, what makes us feel good, what makes us feel anxious or angry or some other way that we don't want to feel or we're afraid of feeling. It's very simple to understand, and it's very complex to integrate into our lives. But that's why we have this opportunity every Saturday to dig in just a little bit more, and really dig in on any day, right? There have been some weeks where I have, gone through and looked for the recordings of previous sessions, because it's like, I think that we talked about that. Let me go see um, what Mark Gilbert had to say about that, or let me go back and listen to what Reverend Victoria said about that topic. And all of that shores up and gives us what it is that we want to believe in, and to apply our faith in a way that allows us to be in alignment with spiritual law. Because that's really all that we're ever doing, right? As prayer is not something we do to change God, because God doesn't change. God is constant, consistent. But our faith is not in God. Our faith, when we are demonstrating it, is the faith of God, that consistent, always present, knowing everything must work out. It can be no other way, because spiritual law demands that. That is spiritual law in action. So take a breath. Like, take this in. Take this in. Ask yourself the question that I ask myself frequently. How am I applying my faith? How am I using faith to move forward toward my goals, to move forward demonstrating that I am a beneficial presence in the world, and that the world is a friendly place? And when I keep going back to what I know is true about faith, and what I know is true about spiritual law, then I have no confusion. It doesn't matter what is happening in the world around me, in the world of effect. I'm not saying I ignore it. I'm saying no matter what is happening in the world of effect, I get myself back to the place of no confusion about this must serve a purpose in spiritual law. And what is my part in shifting my thinking, which then shifts my beliefs, which then shifts my behaviors, which then shifts my habits, which then shifts the experience I have. One of the places that this gets real for me, as a woman of African descent in the United States, with ancestors who were enslaved, and now several generations of people striving for a different life, a quote unquote better life, although I don't know that any life is better or worse. I know there is racism in the world. I would be insane if I were going to insist that there is no racism, because I'm spiritual and I know that there's no racism in God. This is true. And it is also true that there is racism in the world. And it is also true that Tracy Brown is affected by the racism that is in the world. That there are many, many people who believe in a hierarchy of worth and value based on skin color and other factors. Is that the way that God created the world? I don't think so. So, in a completely spiritual perspective, no, racism doesn't exist. It's been a humanly created phenomenon and belief system, and people operate under it or as a result of it every day. And there are days when that directly comes into my atmosphere and my experience by someone calling me a name, using a racial epithet in my presence or in something they write that I read, or how I'm treated when I'm in the line, or whether someone looks at me and then decides they don't want to sit next to me on the shuttle bus. And that could be for many different reasons, and race could be one of them. What is important, because I understand and have no confusion, is I can both acknowledge what is happening in the physical and know that it is not the end all be all. It is not the capital T truth. I also know, because I have no confusion, that I have been made from all of the qualities that are the qualities of God, and that I am here to be a representation of that. And so even if I get angry, I don't stay angry, because my faith is placed in the belief that God is always present. And God is always present and demonstrating itself in me, as me, and through me. So in order to have the faith that I'm here for a reason, I am here for good, I am here to also have the human experience, not escape it. It's how do I bring all of what I understand spiritually to bear in my thoughts, my words, and my actions? And how do I contribute to the world, the larger consciousness, reflecting the pure consciousness of spirit? If I believe that, and if I have faith that I too am an example of this good, then I am going to behave differently. I am not going to ignore. I'm not going to lie to myself and do spiritual bypass that, oh, I believe in God the good, and racism isn't good, and so it's not of God, and it just doesn't exist. It exists. We live in a physical universe. And this talk, or this example I'm not using it because I'm angry about racism. Racism is a given right now in the society we live in. I can see that, and I can place my faith in I am part of the words and the actions and the model that helps move us collectively closer to harmony and unity and love. But I can't do that into the collective until I first do the work with myself to understand that I'm not a victim to it. And how do I handle myself in those situations that are uncomfortable? How do I build myself up? How do I demonstrate my faith in the good rather than my fear of that which is not God-like? This is when we start really doing the work. So faith is a mental attitude, yes, but our mental attitude shows up in our words and in our actions. So where else does Ernest Holmes go in this chapter? I mentioned no confusion. I have to have no confusion about the power and the presence of God. And it will show up in what I do and what I say. So here's what Ernest Holmes says about no confusion. And if you're following along in your textbook, it begins in the near the bottom third of page 157. History has recorded many instances of healing through faith. This is an undisputed fact. Yet, we cannot believe in a divine power that responds more quickly to one than to another. We are compelled to see that prayer is not an end of itself, it is a means to an end. Like the practice of the science of mind, it is a way. Note, not the way. This way is the way, the only way, and if you don't follow this way, then you can never get there. It's not that. Ernest Holmes, I believe, was very deliberate in writing, it is a way. He goes on to say the principle governing faith is that when the one praying becomes convinced, their prayer will automatically be answered. Jesus announced the law of mind, saying, "It is done unto you as you believe." The universe exists by its own self-pronouncement, by its own affirmation. It only knows, I am. It knows nothing else. Therefore, wherever prayer in faith touches reality, prays aright, prays according to whatever the truth is, then prayer must be answered. One year, end quote, one year, I usually do a theme every year. And one year, about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, my theme for the year is living in answered prayer. And my practice that year was demonstrated in a couple of ways. One, I challenged myself, if I believe that I'm living in answered prayer, to notice how my prayers are answered. The second practice was to notice when things were happening in my life that I didn't like, didn't want, felt afraid of, etc., that I would ask myself the question, what prayer is this answering? And I learned a lot about myself that year and how I was putting faith in not the specific negative things that happened, but I was still apportioning a too large percentage of my faith in, well, you have to be afraid of that. Oh, you better worry about that. And the universe would give me things to worry about. Or my misplaced faith in a belief that maybe there's not enough money, or money, is challenging in some way. And I needed to clean that up so I could really have faith that, of course, all my bills are paid. Of course, I have money in savings. Of course, I'm financially secure. But uncovering those places where I didn't believe that 100% made me understand the universe was actually answering my prayer, because I had maybe 15% of my brain still thinking that old thought that my parents passed down, that their parents passed down. And it's like, oh, if I didn't have enough money to do something I wanted to do, the script in my head would be, oh, well, you can do this instead. Or, oh, well, that's really expensive. And, maybe you could do something else. It's like, no, if that's what I want to do, I can do it, right? Those are the little ways. So this whole idea of our faith showing up and us developing that faith is really important. So if this conversation is piquing your interest and intriguing you, or if you already know this, but you're being reminded that this would be a good time for you to really focus in on shifting the percentage, your 100% portion of faith, where you're spending more on the positive, on the spiritually grounded aspect of faith, and less on the human limitation that you have faith in, then you really do want to go to this chapter. The section on the technique of acquiring faith is very powerful. And the reminder about conviction and what it means is also really, really strong. And that's where Ernest Holmes ends the chapter on conviction, what it is, and how to develop it and how to demonstrate it. So I'm going to close out with two quotes from Ernest Holmes on conviction as a representation of and an ingredient of faith. Quote number one: because we fail to realize that principle is not bound by precedent, we limit our faith to that which has already been accomplished, and few miracles result. Principle is not bound by precedent. And when we operate from faith, we don't look at what's happened in the past as a definer of what will happen in the future. That is one of the ways we know we are operating by faith or in faith of the unlimited nature of God. And final quote for today: if we are to have an active faith, the faith of God instead of merely a faith in God, our thought must be centered in universal mind. And you heard me mention this a few minutes ago, and it is one of my go-tos, and I hope you make it one of your go-tos, your go-to spiritual principles and beliefs that drive your practices. It is not my job to have faith in God as if God is outside of myself. My job is to demonstrate the faith of God, the faith that there is infinite intelligence always operating and knows what to do, when to do, how to do it, and why. And because of that, there's no need and no space for fear, for long-lasting fear, for a belief in lack or limitation is better than fear. There's no room for that kind of belief because I have faith that through spiritual principle and practice, everything is constantly evolving for good, toward good, for good, as good. So that's all the time we have to dive into this chapter on faith. But really, it is a chapter that I hope you go back to, that you read and consider, or that you listen to this recording a couple of times, because there are different things, different parts of faith that will hit you. And my challenge to you, no matter when you are watching or listening to this, is that for the next 3 days, pretend that you are like a candid camera following yourself around, and notice by what you do and what you say where you are placing your faith. My invitation to you is to consistently redirect your words and actions to demonstrate a faith in an infinite power, infinite intelligence, boundless love, delivering good into the world. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am wanting to remind you that next week we go into the next chapter, which is about mental and spiritual treatment with Reverend Victoria Bomberry. Have a great week, everybody.